All right, everybody, welcome. It is 2:22, and I am thrilled to introduce our first Soapbox speaker of civic term, a good friend now to the school, Monica Chadha. Monica Chadha is a LEED certified licensed architect with over 20 years of experience in the design profession. She is founder and principal of Civic Projects, an architecture practice with a focus on social impact. Prior to starting her firm, she served as founding director of Impact Detroit and led project teams at both Studio Gang and Ross Barney Architects. During that time, Monica was integral to the design of award-winning civic scale buildings such as the Champaign Public Library and the University of Minnesota Duluth's Civil Engineering Building. Outside of Civic Projects, Monica serves as co-chair of the Sensible Growth Committee of the Metropolitan Planning Council, as a strategic consultant for Archworks, and is on the board of the Delta Institute. She has been an adjunct professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology since 2007, engaging students in social impact design practices. In 2010, she was recognized as an emerging leader by the Design Futures Council, and in 2013, she was featured in the inaugural Public Interest Design 100 list of leaders. She holds a Master's of Architecture from the University of Illinois at Chicago and a Bachelor's of Environmental Studies in Architecture from the University of Waterloo, Canada. And she is one of our principal architects on the new campus. And a lot of time. Good, and so with that, I'm very proud to introduce you to Monica, who's going to talk about one of her mentors.
So hi, everyone. Wish we were doing this in person, but it's actually exciting because if we do this right, hopefully you can be asking a few questions while slides are going on instead of us just sort of waiting till the end. So one thing I'm going to say is feel free to chat, and then maybe Kabul, you can just let me know if there's something specific someone's asking, but I'm kind of hoping this can be a little bit of a dialogue. And the reason I'm saying that is most of what I'm going to talk about is Balkrishna Doshi, who is a mentor. He's a mentor by virtue of I've worked for him, and he's an inspiration and kind of core to the foundation of what's become Civic Projects. So if I do anything right, I will get you just as excited about his work as I am. And if we get 50% there, I will be totally satisfied. But what happened is when I was in college, when I was in undergrad, I quite frankly got a little bit frustrated with the focus of education. The school I was at focused very much on kind of Western culture, Western precedent. Everything started in Europe and nothing existed before that. And the reason I'm saying that is what I did is I started seeking out through my own co-ops and work studies, and kind of a little bit what you're doing during the civic term is I started seeking out how could I learn more and how could I get exposed to more than what I was learning in a traditional school environment. So for me, because my roots are Indian, all of my family is from India, I was familiar with the architecture there, but I was also familiar that there was kind of a more human social approach to architecture. So all of a sudden I'm in a traditional school environment where I'm sort of sitting there, well, what about the people? And I care about the people, and can't we involve people in the conversation about designing spaces? And at that moment in time in our education system, it wasn't the most common conversation. So I kind of went, I don't believe you, let me go seek this out. It sounds a little more altruistic than the process of trying to find this at the time. But what it resulted in was me doing a work study semester in India at the Vastu Shilpa Foundation, which is Balkrishna Doshi's foundation, which is part of his practice. So what I'm going to do is I want to run through 3 of his projects just to describe a little bit of his work, but I'll try to put them in the context of how they influence sort of the social engagement architecture. And then if you're curious or we have enough time, if we don't go too long, then I'll show you sort of a specific project that I've worked on in our office that's sort of influenced by his precedents. Let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna try full screen. Sometimes that doesn't. Okay, is everyone able to see that? Are we good?
It's all black for me.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Yep, we can see it.
Great. I'm just going to do the non-full screen mode. So Civic Projects Architecture is the name of the firm. And then this is the man who I credit with kind of completely shifting my focus in architecture. He is 93 years old. He looks exactly the same as he did when I was there 20 plus years ago. The computers are slightly newer. But he is a what I would call sort of a father to Indian architecture. So in 1947, India, there was the Indian partition, and it's when India was no longer under British rule. So because you had a situation where a country had been ruled by someone else for so long, there wasn't a contemporary identity to Indian architecture. And that would be true of a lot of cultural elements. So things were so British influenced that there wasn't something contemporary that people would call Indian architecture at the time. So this photo is Balkrishna Doshi on the right, so slightly younger, with Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier is a seminal modern architect who did several projects in India, including a city called Chandigarh. He did the planning and all of the government buildings, which was a new capital that got formed when India went through the partition. So at that moment, you have non-Indian architects creating seminal buildings because there wasn't the same culture of contemporary Indian architects. Doesn't mean there weren't architects there. It just the identity, right? The legacy hadn't built up. So Doshi went from working with Le Corbusier to setting up his own practice, and kind of where I'm going to focus is kind of where he went with sort of that integration of what he had learned and then sort of the culture and roots of India and what he knew. So Doshi is like a storyteller, an artist, an architect, a humanist. He's really he embodies so many aspects of the arts, and one of the things he does is he does these paintings and drawings that are based on miniature Indian paintings of the project. So this is created by him, and it's of Sangat, which is his office, which is where I had the good fortune of working. And to give you a sense, so he used a lot of Indian technology and techniques of like water for cooling and using vaulted roofs to shed water and allowing airflow through the building. So all of this sort of sustainable guiding principles were being used in his process and his design work, with also this sort of idea of creating the contemporary identity. So imagine that you're trying to build new construction, but you go back to the roots, right? You go back to how did people build this years ago? So this is the Sangat under construction. Sangat is the name of the building where his offices and the foundation lie. And then this is just an image of sort of what the entire project becomes. So one of the things that I loved about the sort of the mythology and the story, so he always has a narrative and a story about the project. So in this case, there was a tree on the site. And when he saw the tree and the site, he knew he wanted to build his office around the tree, right? Based on the tree, and not, literally surrounding the tree. The tree is in the foreground, but create something in nature. So he's like creating a building inside of nature, as opposed to adding kind of nature as a additive element to the design. And you can see with the vaulted roofs, what he did is he left on the upper levels, these are open windows or openings so the airflow can run through. And then the vaulted roofs allow the rain not only to cool but then collect on the side and then be used in the way rainwater barrels or other things would be used today. One of the reasons we're talking about Doshi, and one of the reasons this has come up, is Wrightwood Gallery on the north side has a retrospective of his work, and there's a lot of information online where you can sort of see the work, see the retrospective. In a couple seconds, I'll talk about some videos we did related to that. But what you have is you have someone who, until 2018, when he won the Pritzker Prize, which is a seminal architecture prize, I would say a lot of people, particularly in the States, didn't have much awareness of his work and his background. Doesn't mean people didn't know that his work was there, but his work is rooted in Indian culture and rooted in India. And being rooted in Indian culture and rooted in India, it means it's also really rooted in the people. So he describes his work, he describes his architecture as not complete until it is inhabited by people. And that's, I don't know how that sounds when I say it out loud, but for me, that was intrinsic, right? Like, how can you talk about space? How can you build 4 walls? How can you put a roof over someone's head if you're not actually thinking about what that space feels like when you're inside of it? So it's something that I fundamentally learned through his work. And then I also learned very much about the processes, right? Like, how do you design for people in the process of building architecture? And again, it's like, if you look at sort of maybe a traditional high rise, or you look at some of the sort of large scale buildings, they're of such a scale and vastness that an individual person may get lost in the design process. But here we're talking about an architect where the individual is the process. So just because it's partly an architectural conversation, I'm showing sort of a more technical section drawing. So part of the building is below grade to keep it cool. You know, the water spills over and then collects. And then this is one of the sketches of the project. So you kind of get a little more of the spirit of the building once you start seeing the people and the inhabitants, but also just the way, you know, the way his hand moves. And then again, like sort of this drawing and storytelling becomes so much of his work. So not only is Doshi working at a community engagement aspect and a community integration aspect, he's also working in collaboration. So I'll come back to the community engagement with the next project, but with the collaborative piece, this particular project called Gufa was with MF Hussein, an artist. And what he did is he worked collaboratively with the artist, and the artist challenged him to build architecture and do something different than work he had done before. So one of the things, if you sort of go online and look at more than these 3 projects, you'll see the diversity of his work. But by being challenged to build something in a way he had not built before, he had to explore new techniques and new approach. So this Gufa is literally very much subterranean. So you're seeing the roofs here. And one of the challenges with such organic construct is, how do you build it, right? Like, I can't drive up the concrete truck and pour this form, right? This has to be made in a very crafted way. So what he had done, and here I'll skip ahead for a sec. What he did is he actually returned again to traditional architectural practices and traditional construction practices in India. So there were craftsmen who came from nearby villages that actually created the what I'll call the mold, right? But the basis by which the tile was laid. So this is what it took to get to this, which was all work he had never done before. And then in counterpart, Doshi's like, well, MF Hussein, I'm going to challenge you too. So what his challenge back was, he created this incredibly organic, subterranean, amazing, lit from the sky space with what are huge canvases by every surface, but also really unusual canvases. This isn't the way MF Hussein had worked as an artist. So MF Hussein as an artist now was challenged to create art at a scale that he had never created, and in an environment that he had never created. So this project, the part of why I'm showing it is it's this amazing synergy, and it's an amazing example of collaboration. And collaboration is so much of what we do in our practice now by seeing it through these kinds of inspirations. And of course, assume you guys can see that error message. Let's see if this works. Okay. Why don't I ask if you guys have any questions? It froze, right?
I don't see a picture right now, Monica.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to reopen the file, but why don't I take a pause for a second, just ask if anyone's got any questions.
So Monica, you've got a couple comments in the chat. Layla says, have you heard of Earthship homes? I've heard the design is more sustainable and better for the environment. And Mena, along the same line, says that this particular project reminds her of earth homes, ones that are built into the ground or hills for cooling. Adam says it reminds him of mural paintings. I wonder if any of that inspires some comment from you. Did Monica freeze? Are we here? Did we lose Monica? What just happened there?
We lost Monica, it looks like. Oh no, maybe she's
Monica
back.
is now back. No, I just got back. It really works well when your presenter disappears.
Yeah.
Can you repeat what was in the chat? Because I missed it.
Yeah, because now you can't see it. So it says, one student asked, have you heard of Earthship homes? I've heard that the design is more sustainable and better for the environment. Another student says, reminds me of earth homes, ones that are built into the ground or hills for cooling. A faculty member says it reminds me a little bit of mural paintings. And I wonder if any of those three comments inspire a reaction from you.
Actually all three. So the notion behind some of the earth homes and the earth building is definitely resonates, right? The getting the cooling from underground, submerging so things aren't getting as, like, the heat is being held as much as the cool is being held. And I love the analysis to mural paintings. I don't know all of the artists' influences, but I've got to think that some of the what's happening at this point in time is Indian architects and artists are learning by everything around them, and it's a cross influence. Something that Doshi says is that he takes what he's learned globally and brings it to India. So his intention isn't to go do work all over the world. His intention is actually to build a synergy between what he's learning internationally to a local context. And I'm making the presumption that MF Hussein was working in a similar way.
Great. And then there's one other question that just is, have you got any motivational or other advice you'd give to a high school student interested in architectural careers?
As long as you have a lot of perseverance and patience and passion, I would say just go for it. I'll show you in a sec one of the projects that we did that was influenced by his work. But for me, the biggest thing when I was in high school and college was finding the passion in it, right? Finding the thing you love the most. And the reason I ended up, I mean, I had to do the research to find who in India I could work with. I had to send portfolios to people in India to convince them to work with. And I got this little like one-page fax, because there wasn't as much technology. I've just dated myself. But I got a one-page fax back from his office saying, we will see you on January X. So all I had to go with is a fax that said, you can come to the office. I had nowhere to live. I had never been to Ahmedabad. I had no idea what to expect, but I had a job. And saying this out loud to a bunch of high school students, probably not the smartest thing in the world, but there was a passion and a drive. And I had roots in India. I did have family there, but nobody in Ahmedabad. But I so believed that this was important and did have the support of my family that I could get out there and try this out.
That's cool. There is a question about, do you have to be really good at math to be an architect? And I guess one of the questions I would ask along those lines, Monica, I just lost your picture. I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah, I put the screen on as well.
Okay. So one of the things I've been sort of amazed at in the process of building out this new campus is that architecture is a more complicated job than I realized it was, in the respect that I think of it as in terms of I don't know, imagining and then designing space, but there's so much in the process. And I guess I wonder if you could say something about what are the characteristics of a compelling architect, or the skills of a compelling architect?
Yeah, I'm going to use a couple of photos to try to answer that. So this, just real quick before I answer that question, is this is the entire Gufa in its entirety. So just to build on that collaboration before I go to that question, the other thing that's happening is there's now a space for performance, there's a space for entertainment, there's a space to gather. So all of a sudden, this artist gallery has become a space for other artists. This was relatively close to where Sangat, Doshi's offices were. So we would go and like sit on these roofs and listen to music and be in this amazing environment. So all of the influence we're building on top of each other. And then to your question about kind of what does it take? No, you do not have to be fantastic at math. You can't avoid math, but you do not. The best thing about buildings is they don't move except for earthquake conditions. So the physics, maths, and information that you need is limited. And I'm not trying to play it down, but it's just like physics was not my big strength, right? I didn't go into architecture because I was great at math, but I could learn and build on those skills as part of my education. But just as importantly, the fact that I had a background in music, the fact that I was interested in art, the fact that I loved to travel, I loved to go and see buildings and walk through them and understand what they were made of. Those were just as important as the sort of technical of the math. So a lot of people go into architecture even after doing undergraduate degrees in all sorts of other disciplines. And I think that actually makes for amazingly well-rounded architects because they're coming in with a lot more than just a technical. And then Cowell, I think that's to your point, right, of the design process we've been going through. The energy, the desire, the essence are all really important. And before we can really kind of solidify the four walls or place a window, we really want to know what the essence of the space needs to be. And then we can design the technical parts.
Awesome, thank you.
So this project is, I just want to show a couple of the sketches. This is the project that, I didn't get to work on this specific project. I got to work on a project similar to this. So Aranya is a housing development that is based on incremental housing, based on community engagement, and based on individual economic needs and abilities. So this project, what Doshi did is he set up, so traditional housing, the way we know it is like, okay, I have 3 bedrooms, I have 2 bathrooms, I have a kitchen, and the house is static, right? It is what it is. For Doshi, his work became, what is the essence of a house? And the essence of a house in India is really the plumbing, right? The kitchen and the bathroom. If I have the root of my kitchen and my bathroom, almost everything else is incremental, can grow over time. So what he did is he set out this entire project based on the services, the kitchen and the bathroom, and everything else about it was designed to change over time as your family grew or evolved. So all of these drawings and sketches and these constructions were not all designed by the architect, but grew over time. And I'm going to skip the plan for a second and go to this. So in this sketch that he drew after the complex, so he built maybe like 100 houses of what became 10,000. And the 100 houses were like, here are 20 configurations in 20 ways. This one has 2 stories, so you can have 2 generations of family. This one's 1 story for a family. This one has a room that can be a store. This one has a room that could become a bedroom that you could rent out to another person who works in the community. And so what he tried to imagine was just a bunch of different scenarios. But then what happened with the project is you got to build it out over time. So in some cases, maybe you did hire someone to help you build the concrete walls, or in another example, maybe you use tin or another readily available material to sort of build your bedroom or surround your space. And in other cases, maybe you used that front room as a store. And I loved for me, the incremental housing, the idea that you could use a room either as a store or as a living room, or as an extra bedroom for a guest or a renter. Just to say it blew me away is not the right statement, but like, I was coming from a culture where, like, when you're the architect, you make all the decisions and it's done. And my project at the time was trying to be a project that involved people in the process of the design, but I was in an architecture school that wanted to see what the design was. So how could you talk to people to build a building when you're supposed to be the architect? So I was at this cross purpose. I'm like, I want to do something rooted in community, but you want me to draw it before I've even talked to the community. So that's the whole foundation of civic projects in a very complicated nutshell. But what Doshi showed me through example is that you could start something, you could be a node, you could be a hub, and then you could allow it to evolve over time. And that, as a concept in architecture, when I was studying architecture, was not common. For me, that's actually become the foundation of my practice now, right? That I can't put pen to paper, I can't design, I can't build my projects until I've actually worked with the community that is either the stakeholder, the user, the neighborhood, the entrepreneur down the street, the person taking the transit nearby. Like, your stakeholders or audiences are going to be different in every scenario, but you have to involve all of the different constituents in your process. And I'm not going to pretend every time we get to do everything, but the basis is that we are not, it's not coming out of my head, right? It's not this internal private process that then generates some magic building at the end of it. So that basically became civic projects. I feel like I'm fast forwarding like 20 years of content in my head, so sorry that I'm stumbling over myself a little bit. I do have a few slides of a project, but I want to pause again because I'd rather answer a few questions about this process, and could always even just like share some slides with Cabell or something another time to sort of see examples.
So there are some comments in the chat. Brent, faculty member, says it reminds him of a Marxist geography and the right to the city. Very not Chicago. A student says, I think now it's been innovation, corner cutting, and aesthetic over functionality and use for buildings. This notion of construction reminds Brent of Legos. Not very Misesian. Again, I don't know if any of that inspires another comment.
I'll show you. I think the couple of them do. I'll show you. I'll tell you what we did with some of this, but use the Lego. I'll go straight to this one. The Lego comment and the idea of like not gridded Chicago. So this in the foreground is a model that's actually made up of a kit of parts, right? It's made up of a whole series of components. And in non-COVID times, in this exhibit, you could actually move these pieces around and actually construct the houses. So this configuration would be an example of what a block might be, a couple of blocks might be at Arenya in the project. But when you break it down a little bit more, there's like the stair, the porch, the balcony, the kitchen, and all of these elements just keep reconfiguring in different ways, which then also means your relationship to sort of public and outside changes, and your internal courtyards or your internal lighting also changes depending on how you configure these. It is much more free speech, free form than it is sort of traditional gridded Plan of Paris, Plan of Washington approach, right? This is a very much of an organic construct. Even the beginnings of the project was like, we're going to demonstrate with this first 100 houses, and then over the next 10 years, the development will grow and develop. These couple photos, this is something I'm hoping a few of you are a little bit curious about, is what we were challenged to do when the exhibit came to Wrightwood Gallery was, you know, how do you have someone who's a 93-year-old male architect from India, who most of his seminal work is sort of mid-century, how do you make that relevant to a contemporary audience, right? Like what's going to drive you into this? And particularly in COVID, why would you look at this online, or why would you engage? So that became our challenge. So I did the programming with Wrightwood to look at Chicago context and contemporary relevancy. And what we did is we reached out to an artist, Edra Soto, an activist, Aisha Butler, and author journalist Natalie Moore. And what we did is we invited each of these three women to come to the gallery, walk through the gallery, and reflect on kind of what inspired, what motivated, what was curious, what resonated, and then have each of them invite us back to their neighborhood and walk us through the neighborhood in a way about sort of, again, relevancy or context. So for Edra Soto, because I showed you the MF Hussein Gallery, Franklin is a project she has in her backyard, which is a gallery that showcases other artists. So she talked about the synergy, about collaboration, and how collaboration was at the root of her artwork. Aisha Butler in this picture talked about from India to Englewood at one point, where what she saw is this more organic approach and this spillover of public and private, because there are relatively large tracts of vacant blocks. In Englewood, she all of a sudden was thinking, maybe there's a different way we can configure the block, right? Maybe there's a different way we can configure the neighborhood. So it was incredibly inspiring to hear these conversations. And then Spirit of Space, which is an amazing film company in Chicago, videoed all of these conversations, and there's 3 5-minute clips online that we can send the link for. But I would say if you want to try to hear a bit about how this kind of cultural synergy, as well as kind of connectivity between the past and the present, I'm biased, I was involved with them, but I think they're really engaging dialogues.
Awesome.
And then again, I'm sort of thinking that it doesn't make sense to show more slides, but maybe just take a few questions while we have time.
We've got another comment from Brent, reminds me of Theaster Gates and the Dorchester projects.
That's a great Chicago example. Theaster as an artist has worked to build community and build residential projects and build artist and collaborative spaces locally. And that is such a great example, or contemporary example.
I wonder, I mean, just to sort of push your comments about architectural control and the notion that you might sort of seed a project in the way that it sounds like Doshi did with his sort of residential project there. That there's something about some of these neighborhoods that feel unarchitected, right? I mean, they don't feel like they have been designed in the way that I understand design. Again, I don't know where the question is there, but is this a sort of innovation of Doshi's, or is this a feature of Indian life and community development, or what's the?
It's maybe a combination. So organic growth to cities is probably is much more common kind of historically than contemporary context, right? At some point we got to gridded streets and, you know, car traffic, which completely changed the idea of like, I put a house by a tree because it's got shade, and then eventually made a well to get water, and then the path between the well and the tree became the first path of the village or street or what eventually became a town. So some of that organic growth is absolutely rooted in the historical context, but it's also for me, part of the takeaway is that ability to evolve over time, right? The evolution aspect of it in part comes from his creative approach, because I really feel that he's an architect who set ego aside. So when he talks about cultural roots and influences and uses mythology and uses art to convey and communicate, he's very much not talking about architecture in the way Western culture looks at architecture. So it's both. It's very much cultural, but it's also his desire to embody that and push it forward and not bury it in history.
Great. We got one more question here and not a lot of time, but Manna asks an interesting one. She says, since the first few buildings were more rounded, do you think shapes play a role in being a welcoming environment? And she continues, they continue, like it is efficient and easy to make a cube house, but would a spherical home or any other shape be better for the person?
I'm not sure what shapes are best, but I would say that contours and body and organic forms definitely feel much more natural. So there's a comfort to that. There's a pragmatism to construction, right? A straight line's easier than a curved wall to construct. But the organic also allows things for like the water to collect and the air to flow and the sun to come in. So if we weren't completely caught up on cost of construction, I think you'd see a lot more fluid and organic buildings out there.
Awesome. Well, it is 3 o'clock. I'm conscious both of Monica's time and everybody else's. If you've got just a moment, and again, could populate the chat box with any parting comments, thank yous, congratulations, etc., that would be great. Monica, again, is a friend of the school. If you've got particular questions or comments or would like to see something more, please let me or somebody else know.